Is this thing on?
Hi.
Hello?
Is this thing on?
Hi, is this thing on?
Is this thing on?
Is this thing on?
Hi, is this thing on?
Are we open?
Welcome to Open Ed Mic, a podcast where voices from across the educational landscape share insights, stories, and strategies for transforming learning through openness. Whether you're new to open education or a seasoned practitioner, Open Ed Mic invites you into the conversation. Let's hear who's joined us today, and we'll start off with Brittany.
Hi, everyone. Brittany Dudek, Director of Learning Resources at the Colorado Community College System Office, joining from a snowstorm here in Denver.
All right. Thanks for joining us, Brittany. Kevin.
This is Kevin Corcoran from the University of Central Florida here in Orlando.
So we go from snowstorm to Orlando. Let's go a little bit in between. Find Zach.
Hi, everybody. I'm Zach Kleba. I am at Dominican University in River Forest, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, and we are very wet and rainy today.
Thanks, Zach. And I'm Mike Mills, recently retired from 35 years in higher education, and looking forward to the next chapter in my life. Today's guest is Dr. David Wiley. He is currently an Academic Affairs Fellow for AI in Education at Marshall University and has served as the Chief Academic Officer of Lumen Learning and a foundational figure in the open education movement. For over 2 decades, David has been at the forefront of rethinking how knowledge is shared, most notably through his creation of the 5 R's of openness, which has become the gold standard for defining OER. Much of his recent work focuses on the seismic shift occurring at the intersection of open education and generative AI. Through his influential blog, now let me start that over. I'll start from the whole paragraph. Much of his recent work focuses on the seismic shift occurring at the intersection of open education and generative AI. Through his influential blog, David has been challenging the community to look beyond just free textbooks and instead toward a future where AI and open licenses work together to create truly personalized, continuous learning. He is a thinker who consistently asks, now that the technology has changed, how do we better serve the learner? It's such a distinct honor to have a true pioneer of the field join us. David, we welcome you to Open Ed Mic.
Thank you. I am super excited to be here. I really appreciate the invitation.
So let me kick it off and just ask you your origin story and tell us how you first got started in the open space. Was there a specific aha moment where you realized that traditional copyright was a barrier to learning?
Well, actually, my original aha moment had very little to do with copyright. I was here at Marshall University in the 1990s, the late 90s, working as the university's first webmaster. And I was developing a JavaScript calculator, which was the very cutting edge of technology at the time, calculator and web page. And it occurred to me as I was working on it, I just had this moment of like the clouds parted and a shaft of sunlight came down and rested on me. I thought, this digital calculator is very, very different from the physical calculators that I have known before. Like a calculator in an elementary school classroom of 25 kids, there might be 4 calculators and you're waiting your turn and they're kind of getting passed around and you kind of have to wait for your turn to use the calculator. But it occurred to me that once you take this calculator and put it online, 1 million people can all use it at the same time. And that just seemed like magic to me. Now, tons of people had understood this principle for a long time. Economists have technical vocabulary to explain it. I'm not claiming to have discovered anything new. That was my moment when I realized there's something really different here between digital and physical. And my first thought was, that means that if you can just find the funding or whatever kind of support you need to create something the first time, after that, everybody in the world ought to be able to use it for free. And the internet gives us this power to share that we've never had before. And so I got very interested in that idea. But it was right around the time that Napster was happening. If I can, some of the more mature people are nodding their heads about Napster. It was about the same time that Napster was happening, and Napster was teaching us that just because the internet made something technologically possible didn't make it legal. So we had this incredible capability to share on a scale that we had never shared before. And then Napster leveraging this capacity to share at unprecedented scale in ways that were clearly breaking the law. And so some work needed to be done in order to make this technical capability, make it also kind of legally allowable. And so that's why in the late 1990s, I started working on open licenses for content. But for me, that moment, the aha moment will always be sitting in my office at Marshall University working on that calculator, realizing digital is different in some really special ways.
That's awesome.
I had an acquaintance years ago who was charged with illegally downloading from Napster. So I know it all too well.
I love that, though. What's that?
I said I've never heard or met anyone who's ever been charged with that before. But it was always such a fear. It was so funny.
No confessions here.
No, I love how that story really, it starts from that promise of the internet. It's that this is how we can really democratize information and open it up to people. And I love that it starts out with just a kind of a simple calendar or a simple calculator program, and really looking at it from what is that potential wider benefit. And I think, as it relates to the questions around copyright and how can we, utilize these types of programs and products and learning materials, I guess really looking at sort of this defining the present, I think maybe through that beginning lens. So for those who might be new to the field, you are the architect of the 5 Rs. So retain, reuse, revise, remix, redistribute. And as we are entering this era of generative AI, do the 5 Rs still hold up, or are we entering into the territory of something like a 6th R?
Well, originally for the first, 7 years, maybe it was only 4 Rs. You have to be really old to remember there's a time when there were only 4 Rs. And then a 5th R came along. I don't know, perhaps we'll need a 6th R at some point. I don't see that time in the future, though, at all. I think the 5 Rs map very nicely into what's happening with generative AI and actually give us a framework for imagining things that wouldn't be immediately obvious that we need to think about. And if you set aside kind of traditional OER like open textbooks or things like that and just lay a large language model down and put the 5 Rs next to it and try to think through what does it mean for each of these 5 Rs when the object I'm talking about engaging in those 5 R activities with is essentially a program. It's a language model. And then that has really been driving my thinking for the last 24, 30 months, to understand what they mean in this new world. Because they still mean the same thing, but you apply them very differently in the context of a large language model than you do in the context of a Pressbooks site about introductory psychology.
Well, you were starting there. I was thinking about, remember back when there was only 3 network televisions and all of a sudden a 4th one came?
We're just outing ourselves with our age here.
Well,
those 3 networks were black and white at some point too.
Well, I was going to say, should we talk about the way that each of the 5 Rs applies to large language models, or do we not want to go in that direction?
I would be very interested in that.
Yeah,
I think there's
absolutely.
a correlation between, open ed and AI. And I would love to hear what your thoughts are on how those 5 R's relate.
Awesome. Well, and I've laid this out some in my blog that Mike mentioned a little bit ago, but when there were originally only 4 R's, the 4 R's were reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute. Retain wasn't in the original group. And retain only became a thing once the kind of content industry's business model started shifting toward only providing you access to material, but never letting you own any material. So the drift toward, things like Netflix and Spotify, where you have to pay every month and you get access to this huge collection, but the month you stop paying, you lose everything. Our library databases, library collections on campus have all kind of drifted this direction now as well. So it occurred to me at some point that you can't do any of the 4 R's unless you can get your own copy of the thing. As long as, you can only do the 4 R's if you can get a copy. So retain kind of came in as this underlying, I realized I'd just been assuming that I would be able to retain all along. But at some point, I explicitly named retain as that 5th R. So in the context of large language models, what would retain mean then? It means that I need to be able to download a full set of the model weights, the brains of the large language model, and whatever software I need to be able to load those model weights and use them to be able to give them prompts and get answers back. I have to be able to make, own, control, keep my own copy of those. That's retain in the context of the language model. Then revise and remix. I want to be able to make changes to the language model once I download it, because it's probably not going to behave pedagogically in the way that I want it to behave. It's probably been trained on a lot of customer service interactions where its goal is to make you happy and leave you feeling satisfied at the end of the experience. So you're going to want to come back and use it again. That might lead it to do things like answer questions immediately rather than saying, well, why don't we talk about that a little more? Let's think about this a little more deeply, or some of the pedagogical moves that you would make as a tutor or as an instructor. And so, the difference between revise and remix is subtle, but it's really important. So when you're revising material, let's just go back to the OER, the traditional OER context for a minute. When you're revising material, you're opening that material up and making changes to it and then saving it again. So maybe you'll take a chapter and you'll adjust the reading level up or down. Or maybe you'll go into a chapter and add create a new example to go in there. But you're working internally in the resource, and you're adapting it, updating it, saving it. Whereas remixing, you're bringing together 2 or more pre-existing things to combine them together. And that distinction might seem like it's not very important, but it turns out to have a bunch of different implications, among which are license incompatibility issues. When you're revising, you never have to worry about license compatibility, but when you're remixing, you do. So in the world of large language models, there are analogs to both of these things. So, excuse me. In the world of large language models, there are analogs to both revise and remix. So in revise, I might take a language model in which all the weights are given at a crazy degree of precision, maybe 16 decimal points, 16 digits after the decimal point of precision, and there might be billions and billions of these numbers in the model weights. One technique that people use to make these open source models smaller so that they can fit into the memory of your laptop and you can run them locally on your laptop or even run them on your phone is they do a process where they decrease the precision of each of those numbers. Maybe say I'm going to go from 16 digits of precision down to 8 or down to 4. Conceptually, it's kind of like rounding, how you might round a number up to the nearest 100th or something like that. That Obviously, if you have a billion numbers that are 16 digits long and you cut all of them in half, that decreases the size of the model by half. And now maybe it will actually fit into the RAM on your laptop so that you can run it and use it. This is called quantizing. Obviously, as you decrease precision, the model gets a little dumber because its brains are a little less precise than they were before. But that's an example of what it would mean to revise in the context of a large language model. I'm not bringing in any external data. I'm not adding some other pre-existing thing to it. I'm just making changes to the model itself. That quantizing is an example of remixing. Quantizing is an example of revising. Remixing would be where you would go grab additional training data and use it to retrain the model, what we call fine-tuning the model. So you might think about a model that comes off the assembly line to you as kind of maybe as having an undergraduate degree in general studies, but you need it to be really smart on a specific topic. So you want to send it to graduate school. You want to take all that general knowledge it has and add a little more specificity to that. So you might take data on a certain topic or data that exhibits a certain behavior. Maybe you're going to grab 15,000 examples of tutor interacting with a student in a way where those exchanges follow best practices of highly effective tutoring. And you want to show 15,000 examples of that to the model so that it can learn that behavior. Pulling that data in, doing some additional training, that would be an example of remixing, where you're bringing the existing model weights and then you're adding in the impact of this other training data and doing a second training run. So revising and remixing both have their analogs here in the large language model space. And then reusing and redistributing, I think, are pretty easy. For redistribute, I need to have permission to be able to take my quantized model or my fine-tuned model and put it back online and let anybody else download it and do what they want to do with it. And then permission to reuse, of course, is just I need to be able to fire up the model and send prompts to it and interact with it and talk to it. But each of those 5 R's has a very clear mapping over into this world of generative AI now. And the arguments people are having about what does it mean for a large language model to be open, there's not quite a holy war going on about that, but there's some very vigorous conversation about what that might mean. And for me, if I have permission to engage in the 5R activities, that's open enough for me. That was a long rambling answer, but I hope that kind of shows how the 5Rs apply in this new world.
I think it's great. Yeah, it's really helpful to kind of see how open education and AI, generative AI specifically, how they relate and how really they're kind of shifting into one another, and how you don't really need to divide the two. So I really appreciate that. It's very helpful, I think, for people who may think that there's such a delineation between the two.
Well, and David, I mean, you took us to school here on modeling and creating LLMs. For the folks in the open community that are more familiar with just using the publicly available tools, whether that's ChatGPT or Gemini or what have you, there's been so much conversation about using the tools to generate content and just reduce time to whatever it is, revision time, creation time, what have you. I wonder what your thoughts are about, as these models get trained. Right now, some of these public models are being trained by commercial material or niche content or what have you. And whether or not you think that the content owners at some point in time are going to put up walled gardens or commercialize LLMs. So if you want the latest and greatest on science data or medical data, you're going to have to subscribe to this model. I wonder what your thoughts on that are and how that actually might impact content generation.
Yeah. I mean, the U.S. Copyright Office has kind of been pretty clear that material generated by large language models is not eligible for copyright protection. So whatever comes out of it goes straight into the public domain, meaning that everything generated, I'm going to say everything with a little asterisk, but everything generated by a large language model is an OER when it comes out. Intellectually, I kind of understand the argument that says you shouldn't be able to train a large language model on copyrighted materials, but in my heart, I just don't believe it. When I came through graduate school, I was trained on copyrighted materials. I read lots of research articles, lots of textbooks, lots of monographs and manuscripts, and all of them were copyrighted, and I learned from them. And then I turned around and I started producing things based on what I had learned from my reading of those copyrighted materials. Should I not have been allowed to do that? I understand that I'm not allowed to go, reproduce word for word, pages and pages from there. But if I read a bunch of stuff and assimilate it all, then it doesn't seem crazy to me that if you're trying to, like, again, if you think of this example of kind of sending a large language model to graduate school, if you want it to be very smart, why would you restrict what it's able to read? And the U.S. courts have been pretty clear that in all but one case, that training language models on copyrighted materials is a fair use. It's clearly transformative, right? What comes out the other side of the language model is very different from what goes in. The exception being one involving the results of legal cases and a company scraping just some copyrighted. I'm losing the technical vocabulary now. But the kind of write-ups or summaries of legal cases, using those to fine-tune a model, and then creating a product that's a direct competitor with the company whose data they scraped in order to train their model. And in that case, the court said, this isn't transformative. All you've done is just built a direct competitor. And so we won't allow training over these copyrighted materials in this case. But in a big case like the Anthropic case that was just decided, the judge in that case said Anthropic was perfectly within its rights to train on that huge corpus of copyrighted material that they had, because that's such a transformative use, which is the core of what fair use is about. Now, they did pay a very large fine because they illegally obtained all their copies of that copyrighted material. But there was not a problem with them training on the material. We all read from copyrighted materials. We all learn from them. We all go out and turn around and apply and write and create based on the things we learned from copyrighted materials. Anthropic got in trouble because they pirated, terabytes of copyrighted material in order to do the training. So those are two separate issues, though, right?
Well, I'm going to channel something I think you've said at one point in time, is that I think it was Isaac Newton who actually created calculus, and his estate isn't getting a kickback for every calculus textbook that's sold. So
we all stand on the shoulders of giants.
I want to piggyback on that focus on the legality in the court and the confusion that it causes for faculty. And, I've been around, you all have seen faculty just standing at a copier, copying pages and pages of copyrighted material. And this whole focus now on generative AI has faculty members just continuously worried. Pick your social media platform, your trade journal, and you see it every day. With this world of open plus AI, how does the role of the faculty member shift? Does it shift from content creator to AI curator to prompt engineer? What's the role of the faculty member in all of this?
Well, I think in some ways we've lost the thread over time, because in my mind, the faculty member's primary role is to build relationships of care and trust with their students, where they can encourage their students and support them in a way that when students feel like they don't belong there, or when something traumatic happens outside of school and a student wonders, are they going to be able to make it to the end of term? Or when they just run into a really difficult concept that they're having a hard time wrapping their head around, that relationship is strong enough to pull those students through kind of whatever obstacles get in their way, help them over, under, around, whatever that might be. That seems to me like it's really the core function. And we've lost that as we have bigified our classes to 50, 100, 250, 500 students in a giant lecture section. So my first hope and goal when I look at a new piece of educational technology is, my question is always, how can I use this to shed some of this other stuff that has been put on me in terms of administrative or other requirements that I have, so I can get back to that core reason that I'm here. I do think AI provides a lot of opportunities, for us to shed or get rid of, or probably delegate is the best word, some work that's not super high value add that faculty do, so that they can do more of the things that only they can do. We've talked about this with every kind of wave of technology that's come before, right? It takes a little more off of our desk. So in theory, it's going to create more free time for us to be able to have these kind of deeply personal, meaningful, inspiring kind of relationships that we want to have with students. And I do think that AI also does that. And I think there are more opportunities with AI than there have been with any technology that we've seen before for that.
I think it also demonstrates that the role of faculty is continuously changing. And I think that's a struggle for a lot of individuals, is that constant change.
David, I'd love to have you put your ID hat on just for a second. And so, in piggybacking on this conversation about faculty as creators, much of the conversation has really been, at least in the open community I've seen, as let's use AI to create open content that basically is in a textbook format, which, yes, it's a speed to market. It actually improves the process, but it falls so short of what generative AI could do. So I'm curious, if you're talking to faculty and what they can do, obviously they can use it to do updates and creation and images and illustrations. What would you encourage faculty to actually explore with AI? And then I'm going to come back to another question tied to that.
In the past, and this is not a metaphor that I came up with, I heard it somewhere else, but I love the metaphor of driving a fighter jet down a highway. Like, it has wheels and it can move forward. It can be, propelled horizontally. That's a thing that you can do with a fighter jet, or you can get in an airplane and you can drive it along the road from one airport to another. But it's just such a complete missing of the point of the capability of an airplane, right? You should be getting off the ground. It seems to me that the idea of using generative AI to create things that look like traditional textbooks or traditional open textbooks is very much like a horseless carriage kind of way of thinking about it, right? Here's this new thing. How can I think about it in terms of the things I already know and the things I already understand? So as I'm trying to start to wrap my head around this new thing that is kind of alien and foreign to me. So I get that that's why we started there. But, with my ID hat on, teaching in our graduate programs, at least the two programs I was in, at both Utah State and BYU, I had the great honor and pleasure of teaching with Andy Gibbons as a colleague, one of the smartest designers I've ever known or ever known to exist. And Andy used to talk about how he was worried that we were trying to reduce the instructional design process to the process of turning a crank. That if you just turn the crank this way, that then content kind of comes out the other side like ground beef or something. There's so much more to it than that. So the idea that we would use all this power of generative AI to just kind of turn that crank and have static words kind of come out the other side of it like ground beef is kind of disappointing. AI can do so many conversational and interactive things. I think a lot of people's first mental metaphor for generative AI is like Google. You put in a search or you put in a query, you hit enter, it gives you something back, and you're done. I send a query, it gives me an answer, and we're finished. Helping people understand that you can dialogue and converse and argue and debate and have these ongoing interactions is really the first step to helping people see more of what's possible with generative AI. So instead of using, something I've been arguing for a couple of years, instead of using generative AI to create a textbook chapter that's going to be static and that you're going to go, I feel like I'm bagging on Pressbooks. I don't mean to bag on Pressbooks, but you're going to create some static content that you're going to upload into Pressbooks and kind of say, look there, now I'm done. If you'd invest that same amount of time in developing prompts that give the model sufficient context to understand what domain you're talking about and give it access to the information that it needs to be able to give accurate answers without hallucinating or lying or being wrong, and then prompt it with some just very direct pedagogical strategies and give that prompt to the learner and say, here, learner, take this prompt, copy and paste it in to ChatGPT or whatever, and hit enter, and enjoy the next 20 minutes of your life when you're going to have this in-depth conversation where you can ask as many follow-up questions as you want. There will be no eye rolling. There will be no disappointment or frustration. Anything you're curious about, you can pull on that thread as many times as you want. Just the idea that you have access to this resource that will answer, it will ask, it will correct. It would be like, here's what it would be like. The way that we're using generative AI right now would be like hiring a personal tutor for someone and then asking that tutor to write out notes and hand the notes to the student, and that would be the end of the interaction. That's the way that we're using it, right? But really, if you think about any kind of conversation you can have, any kind of a job interview, that's a conversation. A tough meeting with somebody who reports to you in your organization and they haven't been doing their job as well as they need to, that's a conversation. Like any kind of conversation you can have, you can prompt AI to help you practice that conversation so that you can be more effective at it. And just the idea that this is thinking about AI as a conversational partner, whether it's a learning conversation, a job interview, or whatever it might be, just getting over the idea that it's Google 2.0, where you type in your query and you get an even better answer and then you're done. But being able to think about it in this dialogic kind of way, that's what I've been advocating for. I've been advocating for faculty to stop writing content and start writing prompts and openly license those prompts and give the prompts to students to use so that they can have these interactive conversations where they're getting immediate feedback about their misunderstandings. They're being corrected before that misunderstanding grows and develops and hardens in their brain. So then they're going to have to unlearn it later on, which is really hard. Just making that mental switch is a lot of what I've been advocating for the last 2.5, 3 years.
So in that same vein, if you're able to perhaps convince somebody to expand their use, or maybe in the same conversation, how do you allay fears that Hollywood is going through right now with Tilly Norwood and that, there's this completely synthetic actress that is using other bodies of work. And there's fear from faculty that, oh my God, there's going to be a bot that's going to replace me. And we already have concepts of tutor bots that are high performing that are going to impact. So how do you say, okay, stop using this as Google 2.0, but at the same time, you're not going to have a Tilly Norwood environment?
Well, in every one of those conversations, I go back to the late 1990s. And for those of you who are old, you might remember David Noble, who wrote a series of articles about digital diploma mills, how the internet would be the end of education as we know it, that because online classes exist, universities would be able to fire all faculty and the online courses would just teach themselves. Like literally every concern that people have about AI right now, we had about online learning 30 years ago. And in some ways they were right, and in some ways they were wrong, and we grew and adapted and evolved and we figured it out. Now, is AI more powerful than the internet? Absolutely. Are we going to have to find different ways to kind of optimize what we're doing in terms of the amount of value that the faculty member is adding to the learning experience? Because again, for me, the core thing that the faculty member is doing is building that relationship, establishing the trust, the content delivery, the question answering, those really to me are secondary. They're important, but if you don't have that if you don't have that foundation of relationship, it's really tough. So I think there's a very good chance that in the kinds of settings where today we're already ignoring any possibility of that kind of relationship building, because I've got 500 students in a giant lecture. And literally all the faculty member is doing is standing at the front and giving a very compelling performance to their audience of 500, intro to chemistry students. I think there is some likelihood of displacement or replacement or something happening there. But I don't think we should have ever been teaching that way in the first place. Some of you will remember when online learning was late 90s, more so in the early 2000s, a lot of the objections that were raised to online learning was about its quality, and that, it didn't do this and it didn't do that, and it wasn't high quality for some definition of high quality. But if you turned around, I'm leaning closer and whispering, if you turned around and looked at what was happening in the classrooms, none of it was high quality. It was a total double standard, right? Online, this quality argument was being made in opposition to online just because people were scared of online. And the same people who made those arguments, if you went back and looked at what was happening in their classes would have never stood up to the objections that they were raising about online. So there will absolutely be more double standarding around AI and its use in education. So, for example, is AI occasionally wrong in the answers it provides? Yes, it is. Are humans occasionally wrong in the things that they say? Yes, they are. Are world-leading experts occasionally wrong? Yeah, they are. Are way overburdened adjuncts who are driving across town to teach at 3 different campuses a course that they just got told 2 days ago that they're going to teach, and they're exhausted and frazzled? Is there some chance that they might say something wrong from time to time? Yes, there is. We cannot double standard AI in the same way that we tried to double standard online learning before, pretending that face-to-face is perfection without flaw and rejecting the possibilities of all the things AI might do to support student learning, because there will be some problems there from time to time.
Makes me think of the Clayton Christensen quote about distance learning when he was in a large lecture hall, is that he was in the last row, eyes closed. Instructor didn't know he was there or not.
Everything past the 3rd row is distance learning.
Yes.
And I'm not sure we've gotten beyond that double standard, but that's a conversation for a whole nother episode.
It's true.
Just to jump in here real quick. So, switching from faculty to students, though, I mean, you have touched on the student experience a little bit already. Ultimately, we do this for the students. And with this existing intersection of open and AI right now and how that evolves, keeping that idea hat on, what do you think a typical homework assignment might look like for a student 5 years from now?
Oh, gosh. I hope it's very, very conversational. Over the last decade or two, our assessment design has drifted toward selected response items like multiple choice and true false and things like that because they're just so easy to grade. They can be automatically graded. I think that you will see homework that can be automatically graded that is all completely open-ended. In fact, one of the things I'm currently interested in, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the idea of stealth grading from the kind of games in education literature. But the idea is if you're playing a game and the game is supposed to be helping you develop some skill, it's kind of ridiculous that at the end of playing the game, you would then turn around and take a multiple choice test to see if you had developed the skills that you're supposed to develop during gameplay. Because now, assuming this is a computer game, as you've been playing the game, you've been leaving traces of competence all through all the time you've been playing. So by the time you get to the end of the game, I already know what you can do and what you can't do and where your strengths and where your weaknesses are. And you never even realized you're being assessed, hence the label stealth assessment. I think once we get students engaged in more conversational forms of study, then now instead of reading the textbook, reading, getting to the, or maybe even reading the textbook, getting to the end of the first module, doing a couple of formative assessments, reading the second module, doing a couple of formative assessments. I think 5 years from now, I'm not reading, I'm conversing. Maybe by voice, maybe by typing, depending on whether I'm on the bus or whether I'm at home. But by the end of that conversation, there's no need for me to come back around and do a standalone assessment because the assessment's been happening the whole time I've been talking with the model about what I'm studying at the moment. I think that's what it looks like not very long from now. Now, will faculty be able to wrap their heads around that? Can you imagine an instructor assigning this kind of conversational experience instead of a textbook? You know the old joke about how many university employees it takes to change a light bulb? Change? That's the that's the answer.
What if faculty who don't want to change just relabel their assessments as boss level?
That's great. I'll just have my agentic browser go defeat the boss for me.
Well, David, as we begin to wrap up and look to the future of open learning, to the future of open and AI, can you share a story or an example that serves as a North Star as to why we should be optimistic about the future?
We should be optimistic about the future because we should be optimistic about the future for the same reasons we should be pessimistic about the future. Because people are endlessly creative. They have a wide range of incentives. And there are people out there in the world who just want to do good, who want to be a blessing to others, who want to help lift people out of generational poverty, who want to do this kind of work and work related to it. And they will use these tools in powerful ways that will help this work get done to degrees that it has not been getting done before. Now, will other people with other motivations who want to accomplish nefarious things, will they also accomplish more than they've accomplished in the past? Yes, they will. And there's a problem there for us to sort out. But your question was just about why should we be optimistic? We should be optimistic because, generally speaking, people are awesome. And they want to do what's right, and they want to help each other, and they especially want to help students. I think right now we're in a period of kind of imagination constraint. We can't picture all the things that this new technology is going to let us do. It's like 2000 or 2001. Like, you can't imagine YouTube or Amazon. Like, you can't imagine the things that are coming that are all enabled by this technology that you are already holding in your hands. But it just takes time for people to think, you know what? I could do this. And somebody sees that and says, holy cow, I could do that. And by seeing examples, then it blossoms out into this universe of possibilities. We're this tiny little bud right now. We haven't seen a lot of examples. Everything we're doing now, we're doing in the language of what we've done before. We're using AI just to author the same kind of textbooks we had before, just to author them faster, less expensively. But eventually we'll get beyond that. And I think that's why we can be optimistic.
That is super. And that really, I think, puts a bow on this whole conversation, and looking forward to seeing where we are in 3 to 5, 7 years. And as you said, I don't even think we can envision where we're going to be. So I really appreciate your focus on that, and appreciate your deep thought. I know you've given me a lot to think about. And as we end every podcast, and I think it's very appropriate today because we end every podcast with a bad open ed joke, and those open ed jokes are AI generated. And so let me turn to Zach, who's going to give us today's joke.
All right, everybody, here we go. So, why did the open textbook go to comedy school? To work on its open mic material.
Oh my!
You're welcome, everybody.
Really bad, Zach. Really bad.
It is.
Really bad. And with that, the mic is closed.